on the road and starting. Welcome everyone. I'm Jonathan Warren. I'm the Chief Executive of Localis, the independent place-focused think tank, and very warm welcome in the quite congenial setting for a wartime bunker, Churchill's wartime war rooms. We're here today to launch true value towards ethical public service commissioning. So the format for today, we've got an expert panel to debate some of the issues around better use of how we use £300 billion annually in buying goods and services from all parts of the local public sector, but focusing on, as you'd expect from Localis, the impact at the level of place. Before we start, though, debts of gratitude that must be acknowledged and recognised. First up, great thanks to Alan, Dan, colleagues from the Mears group for supporting our work here. It was really good. It gave us an opportunity to build on our previous examination of how we can maximise social value in place, Brighten All Corners. So thanks for your support here, without which we would not be gathered. Huge debt of gratitude to the report author, Callum McClendon, who's been working on this through a lot of the year. And I think, though, from my perspective, I would say that anyway, but I think we've successfully demystified the complexity of all the seeming complexity around this to present some very strong localist answers to how we can go about maximising our social procurement spend. So, and thanks to for colleagues joining via live stream and who braved everything to join us in the bunker. Never in the field of events on public procurement was so much owed by so many. So, who do we have here on the panel? On my left-hand side, I've got Councillor Paul Swaddle. Paul is Cabinet Member for Finance for Westminster City Council to represent the local government side. Also have great pleasure to introduce Isabel Casaram, Chief Executive of SV UK, Social Value UK, and thanks to Isabel for all your support through the evidence gathering process. When Mears commissioned us to look at this, they asked, could we have, simply talking about openness, transparency and values, could we have 3 open evidence gathering sessions or via webinar? So in addition to talking through the issues, we could do it in public and get feedback from the members. So thank you so much for your support and for, in fact, appearing on our Levelling Up session. Great pleasure to introduce later Alan Long, Executive Director at Mears Group. And it's an exciting big day for you today, Alan. In addition to launching our report, there might be a first grandchild on the way today. So, phones at the ready. And finally, again, somebody without whom we might not all be gathered around here today, Professor Chris White, who, for our money, to our mind, the most successful, interesting backbenchers bill to push legislation through gave us the Social Value Act. So I think we're covering all the bases, national, local, supply side social value to get us on our way. So in terms of True Value Report, those who attended here live, we've got a 4-page briefing looking at this. For those on live stream, you might be able to drop in the link to the Localis website to the report. Essentially what we've done is we've tried to demystify the green paper on national procurement reform, to take it, strip it down to its basics, say what does it mean for strong local value, what does it mean to benefit our communities, to support our local businesses, to reward innovation, but also to reward suppliers who walk the ethical walk, for whom contracting with the public sector is more than transactional, more than bottom line. It really is delivering for the public, for communities, for places, with a heartfelt sense of purpose. We think that is very important going forwards. Have a look at it. We've got a sort of a local charter for English local procurement, which sets out sort of 7. What we can elucidate is 7 sort of key themes going forward about what good could and should look like in this context. Good relationships to suppliers, higher wages, higher skills. So it's really about values and creating the maximum value from £300 million a year, which is 1/3 of total government spend, which is very, very important. So that's true value. Thanks again to Callum, thanks again to Mears Group. Let's get on with the show. And I'm going to invite, we're in the heart of Westminster, in the heart of Whitehall, in Churchill's all-time bunker. Paul Swab, your cabinet member for Finance of Westminster, as our local guide here. Please, if I asked you to get us going. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As was said, I'm Paul Swab, I'm the cabinet member for Finance and Smart City in Westminster, and in part of that role, I'm in charge of procurement. But I'm also a business owner, a small business, and therefore also understand the frustrations of which smaller organisations can have with trying to do business with local government or national government. It can be very difficult for those organisations, and I think I'll talk about some of those challenges as we go forward. But firstly, welcome to Westminster City. We aim to run the best council in the country, and we are leading on this area as well. As my report on new approaches to procurement go to our cabinet meeting on Monday for approval. So we are embedding this. We are walking the walk, as they say. But as cabinet member responsible for procurement, it's my aim to ensure quality services are provided for our residents. And with the recent pandemic, it's no surprise to hear that local government are facing some of the toughest ever financial challenges. So we must also secure best value for money and deliver the most effective services possible. But this need not come at the expense of socioeconomic and environmental benefits that good procurement can leverage. Through the council spending power, we seek to deliver our strategic priorities by securing the best possible outcomes for local people and maximising the value of every pound we spend in terms of creating jobs, skills, and supply chain opportunities. Moreover, within a challenging local, national, and international context, our procurements need to be forward-thinking and flexible, so we are able to respond to new opportunities and potential challenges ahead. Our partnership approach to contract management has helped establish effective and collaborative relationships with our key stakeholders, partners and suppliers, providing a first point of call for all services. Using these relationships as a solid foundation, Westminster City Council has developed a new approach to ensuring our commercial arrangements deliver maximum benefits to our residents and commercial communities, whilst at the same time delivering on broader national and societal goals. We recognise it's our duty as the public sector contracting authority to set ethical standards and evaluate suppliers on their approach to local and wider sustainable development. Our new responsible procurement strategy, going to Cabinet on Monday, provides a framework to help us meet our net zero carbon targets, ensuring human and labour rights standards, and addressing local, economic, social, and environmental issues at each stage of the procurement cycle. I commit to ensuring that Westminster City Council drives competition and innovation amongst a range of suppliers to achieve these goals. In particular, I want to make sure that we support access to contractual opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises, voluntary and community sector organisations, social enterprises, and minority and female-led businesses. We aim to leverage the relationship we have with our Tier 1 contractors to encourage skills sharing, networking, and creation of contracting opportunities for smaller firms, allowing them access to a market that they would otherwise not be able to achieve. We also recognise that we need to do more to simplify the bidding process for these smaller firms and make sure that new responsible procurement requirements are relevant and proportionate to the size and nature of contracts. As a local business person, I can testify that's something that would really help support the local SME community. I'm pleased to be on the panel today, which has such a broad spectrum of knowledge and expertise, much more than I have. I'm an elected politician, not someone who does stuff. Thank you for having me.
Paul, thank you. Many thanks indeed for getting us up to such a good start and for welcoming us. And it's very important from our side we have the local government voice represented at our events. Now, I'm next to invite Professor Chris White to give your thoughts on this. Clearly, next year is celebrating 10 years, I believe, of the Social Value Act. And in fact, even sort of yesterday, there was interesting guidance coming out from Steve Barclay at the Cabinet Office on better regulations to reward good suppliers, prevent bad things happening, and to have a more onus on social procurement. So very, very keen to get your views on where we are in the present day, 10 years on. So.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel. I've always been excited about this piece of legislation. When I entered Parliament in 2010, I was very fortunate to be in the top 3 of people that could present a piece of legislation on the floor of the House. There's one Labour, one Liberal, and myself. This was in the time of the big society. This was Conservatives had just come to the coalition had just come to power. It was a very different, very, very different environment. There was very much focus on savings. I think we were very lucky that I was able to propose a bill that not only had the support of every single department, but also had the support of all parties. We managed to build a good cross-party consensus. And then we got it through the Lords, and then it became legislation in 2012. And as Jonathan says, next year we'll be celebrating its 10th anniversary. So a couple of things along the way. We first had an audit of the legislation in 2015. It was sort of chaired by Lord Young, who was a member of Thatcher's cabinet, and he came to his meetings in a bow tie. It was very difficult to get some of the key points across, why it was possibly better to do things this way than just buy loads of stuff that were really cheap from another country in where the conditions were particularly shocking. The end of the report said 4 interesting things. The first is that the most important, that if this legislation was enacted correctly, it would deliver services better, but also at a less cost. And that is, I would suggest, the holy grail of all local government, not least to its residents. The other 3 things were that there was limited awareness, there was limited understanding, and there was limited measurement of how social value could be actually pinned down. These are all still challenges. 2017, when we did a report for Social Enterprise UK, we estimated that social value was influencing some 25 billion of public spend. We think now today it's influencing some 100 billion. So the acceleration is super quick. I think this legislation is something to do with the law or legislation of unintended consequences. We started off a piece of legislation which was very light touch. We didn't talk about strategies, we didn't talk about definitions. We have some things along the way that have changed all that. We had Carillion, which was the first big trigger that shifted government's thinking into thinking that this might be a good thing that we won't just let happen. We might invest and inject some time and energy in making this legislation happen. But more so, more recently, the three-pronged or the 3-legged stool of net zero, Brexit, and COVID. Those 3 issues have made the government think very differently of how they are going to spend public money. I think society's attitudes has changed in parallel in terms of we want our businesses. We have a really good example here today. We're thinking more about just the profit motive. They're thinking about the impact that they can have on society, which brings me back to the word social value that business can have on our market, on our population, and helping in terms of levelling up. I think this report is absolutely excellent, and I congratulate the author, Caitlin, who's already been mentioned. You've actually got the essence of what we are trying to achieve you've made it very accessible, and I think you've put a really good pathway that people, local government and local government officials and leaders can really pick up and run with. So congratulations to you, congratulations to Localism for hosting this event and delivering such an excellent report.
Many thanks indeed, Chris. Thank you. Next, I invite Alan Long, Executive Director of Mears, to give that. As you know, led into that, Chris, they're very keen to hear from the supplier side what this agenda means for you going forwards.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think, Chris, you were very modest. I think to get the Social Value Act through in that environment at that time as a private member was one hell of an achievement. I know you worked hard with a number of people at the time to get that through. I think what my conclusion, when I'll explain in a minute, is we've still got a hell of a long way to go to really get the maximum value out of that act. And I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of why that's the case. Just a little bit as to why it's so important to me personally and to me as an agenda. You only look at the work that we do. So it wasn't long ago we were an SME. So we were lucky enough to win a small maintenance contract with the district council in Gloucestershire. And then we won another small maintenance contract in Kent. So I don't know quite, we ended up with Gloucestershire and Kent, but that's what we did. And we did a half decent job with that. We now work with about 100 different councils and housing associations, as well as a number of central government departments. What we do is we maintain homes, social homes. We only do affordable housing. We provide housing management, providing solutions around homelessness, asylum seekers in Scotland, North England and Ireland. Most recently worked with the Ministry of Justice in helping criminals coming out of jail to not re-offend by providing them with housing once they come out of prison, and working with other groups to settle them down and hopefully get them back into the kind of life that we'd all want them to have. And also with the MOD in terms of, again, providing housing for people, defence personnel across the UK who can't be on base. You put that lot together, plus the fact that we're quite a big supported living and extra care provider, so looking after people at the end of their life or people with very high learning difficulties needs. You cannot do anything but operate to a very high ethical standard, and you cannot do anything but recognise that when, as we do have now, we have an average contract length of 7 years, you have to do more than is written into the terms of the contract. You don't do that just because you think it's something you have to do because of the Social Value Act. You do it because you know it matters to your workforce, it matters to your business, it matters to the longevity of the contracts that you have. So, and it matters to me, it certainly fits my values as a person and other the leaders within Mears. So this is really important stuff. But I do think we've got further to go to really get the most out of the Social Value Act. We see, I mentioned we've got an average contract length of 7 years, and now we get some very big contracts coming our way, very different to the days of working in district council in Gloucestershire and Kent. But it's amazing the variation across those contracts. They're all supposed to have the kind of contracts we do, 10% weighting for social value. They don't. They're all supposed to have given some real thought to what is important to the communities where that particular contract is delivered. They don't. So we'll get an example on a repairs contract. You will see examples of where the specification comes through to us, and it might have 60 pages of stuff about what they want from the repairs service. And then there might be just one line to say, please tell us what you're going to do in terms of social value in terms of those communities. So I think I would really encourage councils to think about their social value and what they want from their social value intenders in the same way, give the same amount of thought as they do to what they want from the repair service, what they want from their management arrangements. Because as a contractor, Mears is certainly not the only contractor that wants to do a good job on social value. It will clearly help us give a much better response if we hear from the Commissioner what that local community really wants us to deliver and what's important in that local community. Which is why I think the earlier work that Localis did on trying to construct a community value charter, which, if those familiar with the local plan was delivered by a local authority, and it's largely housing driven to define the housing requirements for that area over time. I think something like a community value charter, where residents, businesses, etc., are consulted, and a clear, if you like, model of what is wanted from social value is developed in the form of the charter. Organisations like Mears and small contractors can just say, okay, I really want to understand what's important here. In my bid response, I will make sure that we cover the points that are really important to your residents. The second thing, so yeah, a clear understanding from the local community, I think would help inform tenders better. The second thing is, if you actually have a look at the scoring systems on contracts, so brilliant that there's a 10% weighting in some contracts, not all at the moment, but some. In fact, there are one or two examples now of local authorities going further than 10%, which again is really positive. However, that needs to be done honestly. Now, I'm not talking about illegal practice or anything like that, but transparent practice here. So as an example, and as a very recent example, it happened last week, too often we will see a scoring system which is, say, 60% quality, which includes a social value element, and 40% price in it. So the local community might see that and think, that's good. The Commission here really wants to see, wants to prioritise quality and social value within that, and you might think 60-40, that does that. However, on that particular tender, and this is very, very common, I'm not talking about one situations, if you as the lowest price tender in that particular bid, you automatically get the full 40 points. So you straight away, whatever, you know, your 40% of the marks there. On the quality submissions, there was probably about 20 different method statements. Every one of those is scored independently. And so if you're doing really well, you might get 7, 8 out of 10, perhaps occasionally 9 out of 10, but you'll never get to 10 out of 10, or very rarely get 10 out of 10. So unlike on the price element of this particular tender, where the lowest gets 40 maximum points, on quality it doesn't work like that. So even if you do the brilliant submission, the most out of that 60 points you're likely to get, high 40s, maybe 50, which makes it almost impossible to turn around if you have to come second on price. In this particular tender, it was 40 points for the first tender, 30 points for the second tender. So you're already 10 points down, making it really difficult to make up on the quality. The thing I don't like about that, there's lots of other examples of that, is I think the Commissioner is kidding their community. I'm making their community think this is a quality-led tender, where actually it isn't, because the price, the nature of the pricing mechanism has made them almost, well, as it was the case, the lowest price bid on this particular tender. So I would just encourage us, you know, if you really want to get the full value, not just price and bids, we need to collectively look very hard at the scoring mechanism that is referred to in the report, to ensure that people are not being misled. And if it is a 60-40 quality split, that really is 60% on quality and 40% on price, and not as I've described it. The other thing I would pick up is Commissioners only get the best out of people like Mears through ensuring not only that there is a strong social value submission done at the outset, but also that kind of organisation has the ethical approach that means over a 7, 10, in our case we have some 13, 40-year contracts. That approach, the style of working of that organisation means that really that social value plan is going to be delivered on an ongoing and collaborative basis through the life of that contract. It's perfectly possible for an ethical organisation to write a very, very strong social value proposition, but actually once the contract gets going to behave in a way that means the value in that social value document will never be delivered. So I think we need to look at social value and we need to look at ethics. And again, the Localis report is excellent on that. And one final thing, which is one of the recommendations of the report, which I know is really important, which relates to that point I've just made, is you only get, social value never comes from one organisation, it never comes from Mears, it comes from a number of organisations, including the Commission, including SMEs, including other stakeholders, social services, working together in a collaborative way over a period of time. It amazes me, I think we've got 120, 150 different contracts. There's only one contract we have at the moment that uses the ISO approach for collaboration, which is ISO 44001. which sets out how organisations can work together and gives a clear framework that ensures all parties involved understand the part they are playing, that they're working to common objectives and goals and so on. So I think if I would encourage commissioners to think about, you don't need ISO 44001, but to think about collaboration ethics as much as a social value. So I'll shut up now. I think it's, we've made a good start, but actually we could go so much further, and there's some simple things that we can do that are referred to in the report to really make a difference.
Many thanks indeed, Alan, for giving us the supply side on this. And my final panelist today, Co-Chief Executive of Social Value UK, it's about Strand. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's great to be here, everyone, and welcome to everyone who's watching online. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be on a panel with such esteemed speakers. So I am the CEO of Social Value UK. In a previous life, I was the Vice President of a political party here in the UK. I still am a practicing barrister and I own a small business, so I do understand the many needs and challenges faced by small business owners. And indeed, women business owners. I certainly ran my business at a time when I was raising 4 young children, still am, in fact. And one of the other roles that I currently have is as trustee of the Paddy Ashdown Forum. And it's relevant to mention all of these various roles because they do impact, hopefully, in some of the answers that I will give later on today. But just very recently, as part of my work with the Paddy Ashdown Forum, I spoke on the link between climate justice and social justice, which is something that is a really big current issue, as you know. So in terms of Social Value UK, we are the professional body with a network for everyone who's interested in social value and impact management. And we offer a variety of services to our members, as well as to members of the public, to be honest. So we offer training in social value and impact management. We advocate on behalf of our members and within the social value field. We also consult, and so we input into changes at a local and national level in terms of social value, and we ensure that opportunities are shared. So we're all about open source information and ensuring that if opportunities come our way, we're able to match people in order to ensure that the cycle continues in terms of energy and productivity being moved on. So that's the work that we do. And we operate by a set of principles. So you can have a look at our website, socialvalue.org.uk, and have a look at the principles that we operate by via that. But the few that I wanted to mention today that are going to underpin many of the answers that I give in terms of the way that we approach things are principle 1, which is engaging stakeholders from the very start of commissioning. Also, we talk about principle 5, do not overclaim. Principle 6, all about being transparent. Principle 7, verifying the results. So that part of that is about what Alan was saying, ensuring that when promises are made, they are actually delivered. And finally, principle 8, which is to be launched in 2021 later on, later on. And that is all about being responsive. And in terms of all of those principles that I've talked about, I will drill down into more detail as we continue speaking. But I would like to say at this stage, thank you to the author of this fantastic report, the True Value Report. Unfortunately, for those of you online, you can't see him, but I'm looking at him and thinking, wow, what a fantastic, detailed and very accurate report. You've made it very, very accessible. And one of the key things that we advocate for is to ensure that social value is an accessible principle. It can be very ethereal, very abstract, but one of the things that's really crucial to us is to ensure that it is an accessible concept. And that translates into the work that we do with SMEs and their own accessibility in terms of procurement. And Paul has talked a bit about that already this morning. As a small business owner, as I've said, I would never have dreamed of tendering for any kind of contract at local level or national level. And one of the ways in which we are keen to ensure that SMEs are able to access more widely many of these opportunities is to provide that support to help them figure out where these opportunities are and how they can adapt and be able to become trained, perhaps equipped with the knowledge that they need to be able to access many of these opportunities. I will talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done with the OECD later on, perhaps. But I did want to mention three of the big issues of our time that Chris has already alluded to, which is the impact of COVID-19, the impact of COP26, and also Brexit. And at the time of the core time of the lockdown, I was in my role within politics, and it was through that role that I became very aware of many of the inequalities that we encounter in society. And I think everybody would agree that as a result of the pandemic, many inequalities were brought to the surface that perhaps we had not realised were there. Or if we did realise that they were there, we didn't realise the impact. And so, for example, many of the very human stories that we heard were about children who had to do their schoolwork based on accessing the one mobile phone in a family of 5 people. And these are not just dramatic stories. I heard these over and over again. And, you know, what has this got to do with procurement at such a high level and business and all of these words that we're using here today? Well, what it's about is that where we have inequality at any level, it drills through every level of society. And we have a duty, whether we are part of government, whether we are ordinary people within the community, whether we are corporate stakeholders, to ensure that we do what we can to combat inequality, to fight for personal well-being, and to fight for environmental justice. And those three are core to the work of Social Value UK. Personal well-being, social inequality, fighting against that, and also climate justice. So I will end it there, but I'm really looking forward to continuing engaging on many of these topics.
Many thanks indeed, Isabel. Many thanks indeed to all our panellists for getting us ready for the Q&A session. So for those following, we've got hashtag thoughts there if anyone wants to knock that out, hashtag true value. Put it out to the audience if you could, both online and Zoom. Do you have any questions queued up yet, Joe?
More of a comment at the moment.
More of a comment. Oh, actually, like party conference season all over again, isn't it? So look, come through with any questions either in the audience or on Zoom. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and we will shake it around. Any questions from the live audience? I could like audio. Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam Markey from the Connected Places Catapults, the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport and place leadership. It's a mouthful. We've been doing a lot of work on procurement for the last couple of years because we understand, as you guys have said, it's perceived to be a huge barrier. We think it's perhaps not the barrier that it's perceived to be, but I can discuss that. I was really struck by what you were saying, Alan, about the over-specification of tenders and the mismatch between the outputs and the outcomes. And I was really struck by a piece of analysis that the EFT did a couple of years ago that said something like 23% of public tenders receive only one bid, which is shocking and doesn't get, it makes it very hard for public buyers to actually be identifying value and having choice and hopefully driving new kinds of outcomes. So I wonder if panel wants to reflect a bit on any of the new guidance around innovative procurement mechanisms and whether those help. Whether they, whether that gives us more tools, I suppose, to show my hand a bit. Our work on this suggests actually the tools already exist. It's that people aren't confident to use them, and we're slightly worried that the new reg are almost more complicated. But I'd be interested to hear any reflections that you have from the recent changes on procurement.
Many thanks, Sam. So you said your instinct then is like back in the obviously procurement might be one of the more immediate Brexit dividends. We don't have to go through the whole ODU procedure. But remember back in the days when people complained, well, why aren't we getting enough social and economic value from our tender? Well, the people who are setting the tenders just don't do the work their German or French counterparts do to make sure we were getting those kind of. So essentially, from your perspective, the tools are there, but they're not being used.
Yes, I think we have a whole golf bag full of clubs that we tend to reach for the same one each time, which is the classic ITT over-specifies, whereas actually there's all sorts of other mechanisms. I'd be interested to hear, Paul, what your new procurement approach says about some of those different tools and approaches, perhaps.
So in terms of what we're doing, we are trying to be innovative. I mean, I've certainly, I look at local government and I think, and I thought this from the outside, we procure terribly. We over-specify, we tell you what we think the answer is when we don't know. Particularly I work in the area of software development, and we'll get us, and it's like, well, why would you ever want to build that? And that's a terrible way to buy. So we are working more collaboratively. We are talking to the market before we put things out. We are working on different frameworks, whether it be G-Cloud or other software procurement platforms, but also working with our tier 1 suppliers to encourage them to contract with the SMEs, because they can do it much more agilely than we can. And so if we go out to our supplier on highways maintenance and say, we'd really like you to work with this innovative startup that's looking at how you can do potholes differently, that's probably more effective and more impactful in the short term than us going out to re-procure something, because a lot of the contracts, as we said earlier, they're quite lengthy. Our highways maintenance, our refuse collection, they're all sort of 4 or 5 year contracts. And while, yes, we can influence things at that moment of procurement, it's also about how you can continue to work with them. And the responsible procurement strategy that we're implementing at the moment, subject to a cabinet decision on Monday, actually puts up our social value element to up to 20% in contracts. So we are making sure that that has an impact. But we also need to recognise that we can't be too onerous on those small businesses. We're saying to a business, well, where's your policy for this and policy for that? And it's like, well, what are they going to do? They're just going to go to the internet and copy one off somewhere else. Yeah, that's the brutal reality. Because they're not in a sector where any of this is relevant. So we need to make sure what we ask is relevant. And I think that's getting that balance right. That's going to be, and we're at the start of this. We're only implementing this now. Perhaps in a year or two's time, I'll be a better place to say how successful.
Thank you very much. Well, Isabel, would you like to come in with that question?
Yes, absolutely. Sam, thanks for the question. You sound very well informed yourself, so you should be on the panel. So I talked initially about principle 1 that we operate by, which is engaging stakeholders. And one of the things that I mentioned was that for us, it's very important that stakeholders are engaged at every level, including at the beginning. So Paul, you talked about why even request this particular product or service. And so it's really crucial that we ensure that stakeholders, and particularly local communities that are going to be impacted by this procurement, are involved at the very start. So the drafting stage, before we even get to the stage of issuing, our contracts or seeking suppliers, etc. So that's one of the principles that we advocate. I was interested, Alan, when you were talking about, small businesses trying to go for contracts and things like that. I recently, just this week, had a discussion with one of our members who did submit. They were very brave, and they, as a small business, spent quite some time submitting a tender for a contract. And it was very frustrating for them when they got the feedback to find out that they had not been awarded the contract, or were very unlikely to be, because even though they scored the highest in terms of quality, as you said, they couldn't compete because they had to achieve this tick box exercise of what was required, and they simply couldn't. They didn't have the scale. For many of them, well, certainly in this situation, many of the things that were being required were not actually relevant to that organisation or actually to the contract itself. And that member then wrote to the contracting authority to share their opinions. And it was very brave of them to do that, because I'm guessing that they will probably never be awarded a contract again through that particular organisation. But the point is that when we hear about situations like that, we fight even harder to ensure that SMEs have those opportunities. So we flag opportunities, we assist our members to network with each other so that they can support each other, rather than having to rewrite the wheel and be able to submit information that every single time, because it takes so much energy and input. we ensure that they have those networking opportunities to be able to provide that support that would be, it would be abundant in a bigger company. And we also advocate for changing the tools that are used for measuring social value. And so that's why we focus so much more on principles. We don't advocate or support a particular tool. We say that principles ought to be engaged. And so those are just some of the ideas that came to my mind when you spoke, Sam.
Many thanks, Isabel. Anne, put it to you, would you like to see more different clubs coming out of the golf bag or sand wedge or two when needed?
I'm not a golfer.
Waste for a decent walk.
I think broadly the tools are there. I think collaboration is interesting. What puts people off? And it's to your point actually that I went to a very large contract consultation event, and what's quite often happens after the consultation event, suppliers take their view on whether that really was a consultation event or whether it was, this is what we're going to do. Just fill in. Initially it was a tick box exercise. At the end of it, we got a 1-2-page form to tick boxes against it. So that puts suppliers off because it suggests it's a bit like the pricing quality mechanism I talked about before. It's misleading. It's not transparent. So if you're going to do collaboration. Don't pretend collaboration because you'll lose suppliers by doing that. I think we are in the large provider bracket now, and it is. I appreciate it's difficult because I think, like you were saying before about Carillion, there is much more now, particularly on any contract of size or length. Inclusion around things like financial resilience, strong balance sheets, ability to deal with the ups and downs of things like Brexit that we've had. Because of Grenfell Tower and other events, there's much more evidence you need to provide around safety compliance and safety track record and processes and policies. And there's much more around regulation now than there's ever been in my experience. You put all that together, it is tricky for an SME accepting very specific contracts to get through all of that without the support of a large provider. So I don't think I have the answer to your question specifically. It is, I'm broadly unhappy with the tools, but it is about using them properly and not trying to mislead people.
Chris, take.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, Sam, my employer is the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult Network, which is sort of distant cousin of yours. So I think this is really interesting. And I think basically our local authorities, our national government is risk averse for all and many good reasons. I think we need to think about freedom and how do we give our local authority and procurement officers permission to be innovative and creative and do things differently. I mean, we do have the challenge that most accounting methods we use today have been developed over the last 3,000 or 4,000 years, whereas the accounting methods and tools that are associated with social value have been around, as we've said, not even 10 years. So we don't have the case studies, we don't have the experience, we don't have the examples, we aren't able to compare like with like. We just know, we've got a feeling that we want to do business differently. We want to see how we can relate to communities, how we can relate better to our environment, how we can relate better to individual well-being. We all know that is the case. We all know those things to be true. The sort of I suppose where we want to get to in terms of legislation is how do you make that happen? I suppose that the answer to that question is that our technology is developing at such a rapid rate. We've already talked about 25 billion to 100 billion in the last 5 years. There is a demand for this stuff. How we measure it can be using the technology, the big data, the comparisons we can have locally, nationally, even internationally. We can see where things work. We can see that if you close that youth centre, this is going to be the cost of that community in which you have closed that. About 100,000 you've taken off the bottom line on that local authority accounts the cost that 100,000 saving is going to make on that community in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of housing, in terms of benefits, will far outweigh the cost of closing that youth centre. So I think we do need to do a bit of more work in terms of understanding. But where this should end up is a far greater use of co-creation, co-design, and co-production of all the things that the social value asks for. So, yeah, that would be a start.
Many thanks indeed for that, Kingship. Thanks for great questions, Sam. Any more for our live audience? One from Dan, then we'll go to the Zoomers.
Thanks, John. I'm Dan Garfield, also from Mears. I'll keep this short so you've not heard from all of us. A big challenge that we've been thinking about at the moment, it was really interesting, Paul, hearing that you're actually going out to the market and trying to understand what it is you want first. And a big challenge that's coming locally and nationally is going to be retrofitting and net zero. At the moment, I don't think even the suppliers understand it. I don't think local government understands it. I don't think national government quite understands where it's going yet. So it is going to involve a very transparent conversation about how we make this work. And also, you know, there's a huge opportunity for social value along the way. How do we achieve that? But I think just another thought at the moment, I mean, we privately have just been doing some analysis. And actually, if you look at the companies in Britain right now, if you were to ask us, how will we deliver this by 2050? I think that the companies available in Britain right now probably wouldn't be able to do it, wouldn't be able to achieve net zero and retrofit every public building, whether national or local, which means that if we don't have a real conversation about how we're going to achieve this, there's going to be disruptors, probably from, you know, other French companies, other German companies, like in the energy market. So this could be a real opportunity for British industry, but we do all need a conversation about it to make it work.
Many thanks, Dan. So I've identified, I think by all the panelists, kind of three biggies: Brexit, COVID, net zero. Specifically net zero, any thoughts or comments in relation to what Dan had to say about how we might attain net zero, given all else impinging on supply chains, procuring it, and the rest of it?
In terms of the event I spoke at a few weeks ago in the City of London, a joint project in the City of London, that was specifically around net zero and also the circular economy within the construction industry. And the approach we're taking there is to get the SMEs involved, because they are the ones that are having the innovative ideas. You know, they are the new way of doing something. And I think part of the problem is we're looking at this saying, we can't do this by then, but that's because we're only looking at the tools that we have today. There are tools that we do not yet exist that will be part of that journey. And I think that's where we need to get those innovations in. And to be honest, I don't mind whether those innovations are homegrown or grown somewhere else. The important thing is that we get on with the net zero agenda. I'd love that to be a UK economy-driven piece, and we certainly will encourage those organisations, and that's what we've been doing. But it's the freedom is the ability to do trade wherever, not to only do trade in the UK.
Many thanks, Paul. Anyone, other panelists, like to take up the net zero very quickly so we get to Chris? Anything?
Yeah, just a quick point. I would step back a little bit, and I do think that we do need to ask the market. But I think before we do that, we need to establish trust in how we, again, learn to work together in collaboration and partnership. Because I think we've lost some of that. I also think that once you've developed this trust, you need to work out how consultations can be genuine. And I think if you are going to approach the community, they need to believe that what they're saying is going to be taken on board by whatever local authority or national government. And I think that's important for our local political leaders as well as our local officials to make this happen. And I think we've got a bit of a way to go on that.
Many thanks, Chris. Anna or Isabel?
Yeah, so I spoke last week via the Paddy Ashton Forum at an event that was talking about this very subject in terms of climate justice and the way in which we can ensure that social value is represented in reaching the end goal of net zero. And it was great to have access to lots of people who were inputting their ideas, because we had a series of round tables. And there was a lot of emphasis on politicians doing things. So a lot of talk about that. Politicians being the main drivers for change and having access to power. But one particular participant talked about the power of individuals. And I think that it is absolutely a combination of both. It's a community effort. It's got to be something that's driven by many people. And I think about the example in America of a housing organization. So within a particular area of America where they were trying to ensure that housing was built in a way that was carbon efficient, but also met the local needs of people there and ensured that it was actually adapted to what local people needed. What those in power did was that they gave that project over to local people to ensure that they decided what was actually needed in the first place, the way in which they would ensure that they would meet the needs of ensuring that the buildings that were created were as green as possible, how they spent the money, who they employed, and the entire project was given over to the local community with some input obviously from decision makers. But that was such a brilliant example for me, and in fact I've written an essay that will go, as part of the work that I've done, so hopefully you'll be able to read it and access the actual example itself. But that was a brilliant example to me of not only using high level power, but also the power of individuals to ensure that we are able to achieve that result. Because as you say, it's not something that can be achieved quickly, and it can't be achieved in silos. It's got to be achieved as groups working together harmoniously.
Many thanks, Isabel. As localists, individual is the ultimate localism. So yes, we very much like that. Alan, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and I think we need, and obviously net zero is talked about a lot, but actually the biggest immediate impact for many people is going to be the impact on fuel poverty, and that debate that language gets lost, I think, a bit in the net zero aim. And if we need to engage, get a lot more people involved, the immediate impact is tracking fuel poverty. If you look at what the issues I see are, so we already have capability to, across social housing stock, work out the carbon efficiency of homes, apply for grants, design the work that's needed, consult with residents, install all the work that's necessary to make that home more carbon efficient, and to measure the impact of that with tenants in terms of the real impact. So that capability is there. The two things that are difficult for a supplier at the moment is understanding how fast to expand your capacity. So the way the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is being handled in this country, and the equivalent, it's got more initiatives in Scotland, I can't remember what it's called, is batches of funding are being released. And it's pretty unclear as to what size of that batch is going to be each time. And local authorities and housing associations do need that funding, but they've got very little real understanding as to how that funding is really going to develop and how much they are going to see over the next 1 to 5 years, 10-year period, which makes them reluctant to make any kind of meaningful and long-term decisions at the moment. So we are literally, in the last 3 months, we wrote 3 bids for the latest release of Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund. And next, we'll wait and see what happens in Q1 around the next release, and based on what that is, we'll do some more grants for our clients. What is tricky about this is the workforce needs to be built up. So all the gas engineers, obvious point, they're currently gas engineers, will not be doing traditional gas engineering by 2030. So there is a need to invest in the workforce, whether you're an SME or a large company, over time. And it would be great to do that with greater certainty. It's about a long-term view needs to be taken to funding and funding releases, rather than what is being happened at the moment, which is little batches, and you don't quite know each time what the next batch is going to be. This is a long-term project. The funding is currently short-term. And I understand that the country's had a difficult time, but That's the first point. The second point is about benefits realisation. Again, if local authorities and housing associations, who gets the benefit from net zero and the resulting impact on fuel poverty? And some local housing associations and are reluctant to make large-scale investments, as has to be said, in carbon right now, because if actually they don't see the immediate benefit back to them. And there are debates happening as to whether some of the fuel, the energy savings should be retained by the housing association, local authority, or whether all should be passed on to tenants. And that needs to be clear and transparent as well. So my biggest plea is the funding solution matches the problem is long term. The funding solutions are short term.
Many thanks, Steve. And I'm going to give some time, fish out the best questions
Yes.
from Zoom, and we'll see if we can answer these very quickly.
Yes, I do just quickly want to acknowledge we've got a very good question from Liam Nickelborough from Norwich on section 17 of Local Government Act, which we will get back to you on. Leah, I'm going to go for a slightly more crowd-friendly one. How can you improve, this is from someone called Philip, how can you improve and strengthen local authority appetite on the use of socio-economic duty alongside social value for public sector procurement? So this concept of the socio-economic duty to reduce inequality that the Welsh government, I believe, legislated for, and how do you kind of tie that in with social value?
Okay, that's going to be our final question. Social economic duty. Does anyone want to immediately leap in? Thank you.
So we I can tell you what we've done, and that's initially in Scotland. So I said
In Scotland as well, they legislated for the socio-economic duty there. Is that just me taking the lead?
No, it's just purely what how we have responded. So we have set out a set of ethics in Scotland, after consulting with a whole range of stakeholders, including MSPs and so on. And basically what code of ethics is a set of duties that we will adhere to over the long term and report back into independent report back into the Scottish market. We'll do the same in England and in Wales, and we'll know. And that sets out things like exactly like that, a duty in terms of diversity, a duty in terms of workforce representation, a duty in terms of customer performance and visibility on customer performance, a duty in terms of profit, so limiting the amount of profit that we make out of the public sector and being very clear on what our maximum profitability is. So yeah, and so that's how we are tackling it, being very clear on what we believe in and consulting to make sure we get it right.
Many thanks, Andrew, for that concrete Scottish example. Anyone else on social economic duty?
I think it's really, I mean, I do think sometimes that national governments try and stick their oar in too much. I mean, there's all sorts of legislation already exists covering equality, covering all sorts of issues. This is more about, I think, businesses, as said earlier, taking their own moral ground and deciding what they and their employees want. Not all of us want exactly the same things. We have different priorities. People are at different life stages, at different parts of the country have different priorities. And it's up to those businesses to have some self-responsibility as to what they do. And I think that is more important than legislating it from the top. I think by giving local councils the opportunity, we are implementing it, because what we're doing is our version for what people in Westminster want. That may not be the same balance that another council in Manchester might want for Manchester.
Many thanks, Paul. Chris?
Yeah, I think Paul's hit the nail on the head. I don't know if we need to legislate for everything. I would imagine that most local authorities wanted to do things for their community that was both socially and economically right, and that's just doing the right thing, which is presumably what we're talking about today. But I think as soon as you put legislation or duties or these other demands onto a council, there will be a way around it. It will be something that they will claim to have done, but not necessarily have the heart to have done. And that's local authorities, whether whatever the party is, Liberal, Democrat, or Conservative or Labour, this is exactly what they should be campaigning on. They don't need the duty or the legislation to make them do so.
Many thanks, Chris. Final word, Isabel, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. So obviously, as somebody who has been involved in politics and law, I would say that legislation is very important to set the framework for what we expect as a society, and individuals form legislation. So legislation is often based on what ordinary members of the public actually want to achieve. So I wouldn't dismiss legislation as being a driving factor in terms of making good moral choices, whether that's corporately or individually. So it is important to set the framework, but as Paul has said, we have got numerous acts of parliament and various types of regulation and policy guidance and all sorts of things that try to frame the way in which we make choices as individuals and as corporations. And you know, we've seen a brilliant example in Wales of how that has drilled down into from high level decision making into smaller level decision making. But I think one of the other things that's hugely important when we balance that out is to ensure that we appreciate diversity and inclusion and equality at every level. And that includes not over legislating, so that we actually constrict, that we frame people's decisions in such a way that everything becomes very regimented. And so it's really important, especially as we're having a discussion about being local and the power of local, to ensure that when people do enact legislation or implement it, that they have the freedom and the bandwidth to be able to implement those in a way that it does cater for the individual needs of that particular community that they're gearing those decisions towards. So I think that's absolutely crucial. And you know, when we're talking about local authorities, which I think, Philip, that was the original question that you were asking about local authorities specifically, how do we gear local authorities up? Well, I think local authorities, broadly speaking, you know, sometimes they get things wrong, often they get things right, but they equally are driven by people who are mainly, you know, in positions of power and working for those local authorities because they want to work with those local communities. And in this report, it talks about skilling up those departments and those people, officers within local authorities, so that they have a broader knowledge of social value, so that they can incorporate many of these principles that we're talking about. And I think looking at that section, because you've broken it down brilliantly, I'm just looking at the author of the report again, you've broken it down brilliantly in terms of what local authorities can do to ensure that their officers are educated, trained and equipped with the knowledge that they need to be able to really have a kind of even platform across the UK.
Many thanks indeed, Isabel. Many thanks indeed to all our panellists and our audience. So in fine Churchillian manner, this is the end, or is this the end? Or is it the beginning of the end, or perhaps just the end of the beginning? Sorry, it's too obvious, Dan, I had to do it. But look, huge sincere thanks to everyone for taking part today. Thanks to our fantastic panellists, Paul, Isabel, Alan and Chris. Thank you for throwing in questions and making this report launch very worthwhile. Clearly, look, there's something at stake here, something immediate around procurement for levelling up, improving life chances. It doesn't have maybe the political TNT of discussions about levelling up, who wins, who loses, and all the rest of it. But from our mind, from the Localis perspective, this is genuine strategy, this is genuine logistics for improving people's life chances using levers we can all control and improve through the exercise. So it's not a technocratic exercise, it's an exercise as much of the heart as of the head, allowing communities to flourish, businesses to grow and expand, and as we said, to reward suppliers who walk the ethical walk, whilst saying goodbye to maybe some of those firms who haven't really put communities or public service at heart in their delivery. And so it can be a complex minefield, and I think Callum McClendon, well, name you've done a great job in demystifying this, bringing simplicity. My final Churchillian quote of today from the bunker. He said, out of intense complexities, intense simplicities arise. And I think around this, we have something to push on. So it's not the beginning of the end. Hopefully it's the start of a flourishing, continual dialogue so we can improve delivering for communities, people and places into the future. But on that note, we must end it. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we catch up at a future Localis event. Thank you, everyone.